Indian summer.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our virtual roundtable as part of an Indian summer festival. I know those of you guys here in the UK will agree when I say this is definitely an Indian summer right now. I am so hot. My name is Amina and I'm co-hosting today's event with Sheetal from South Asian Sisters Speak. Today we're going to be exploring the term community, what it is and what it means to us. And we're joined by two wonderful guests, Haleema and Shani, who have also successfully built their own communities. Before I introduce myself and the guests joining us today, I'm just going to really quickly go through a couple of housekeeping rules. As you can see, there is a chat function on the right, and we really want you guys to feel comfortable introducing yourselves and interacting in the chat. But please remember that this is a safe space, so it's really important that we don't have any form of bullying or discrimination. None of that is going to be tolerated, and we have some moderators here who will unfortunately have to remove you if you violate that rule. Also, please try to avoid posting unrelated questions or links, and we're really happy for you guys to take screenshots and share on social media, but please try to avoid sharing the chat box if you do post any pictures. I'm just going to quickly put up the social media handles. Here you go. You can take a quick screenshot of this if you want. And if you're posting pictures to social media, let us know. Use the following hashtags, tag the following accounts so that we can see what you're sharing. And we're also going to have a copy of this put in the chat so that it's easy for you just to copy and paste if you're using your laptop. In addition to that, please try to avoid leaving and trying to re-enter. I know some people have like strange internet connections. We're going to try our best to get you back into the event as soon as possible, but there may be a little bit of a delay for that. So my name is Amina. For those of you who don't know, I am the co-founder of a blog called Two-Brown Girls, which grew into an online community of platforming South Asian artists and creatives. I am also the founder of an enterprise called Forward Culture, and the focus of Forward Culture is really the education and empowerment of young South Asian women. So we create a lot of safe spaces in schools and colleges for young South Asian women to explore identity, culture through the medium of art and creativity. I'm also joined today by Sheetal from South Asian Sisters Speak.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Sheetal. I am the co-founder of South Asian Sisters Speak, or SASS. We are a community platform and safe space for South Asian women, created to help women to connect and to share mutual experiences. We were founded back in 2016, and it's really exciting. This is actually our second event in partnership with Amna and with Two-Brown Girls, so excited to sort of be back working together. And really excited to host this really important discussion on community, which is part one of our kind of two-part roundtable series, the next session taking place this time next week on resilience. But yeah, on that, I'm really excited to introduce our two guest speakers for today. Firstly, we have Shani Dhanda. Shani is an award-winning disability specialist, listed as one of the UK's most influential disabled people. In addition to this, and to so many other important initiatives that she's founded, she's also the founder of Asian Women Festival, which I'm sure many of our audience, our kind of listeners today will have heard of. If you haven't, need to go look them up on Instagram straight after this call. And secondly, we're joined by Haleema Bharoocha, joining us from America, which is really exciting for us. She is the advocacy manager for Alliance for Girls, which is the US's largest organization serving young women. She's also a public speaker, an activist for social justice, and a volunteer for South Asians for Black Lives. So firstly, thank you to both of you for joining us today for this really important conversation. We're kind of really honored to have you with us for this. And I guess to kick off, you know, the theme is community, and that is such a big umbrella term. It's thrown around a lot. I know I use it a lot, Amna uses it a lot, and we all, you know, it's thrown around a lot, and particularly now with everything that's going on in the world, you know, we see it more and more. But I guess to sort of kick off this conversation, really keen to hear from you both in terms of what does community actually mean to you? Just a big question. But yeah, really kind of keen to explore that term and how you connect with it. So maybe starting with you, Shani.
Sure, great to be here. Thank you for having me. So I definitely am someone that brings people together and creates communities. I've not only done that with Asian Women Festival, but also with Asian Disability Network. and in other spaces as well. And for me, community means connecting like-minded people, or a group of people that share similar characteristics. And why that's important to me is because growing up here in the UK as a South Asian girl, I didn't really have the representation that I was looking for. It was, someone that looked like me who had a visible impairment or condition. And even though I was part of a big South Asian community, I still couldn't find what I was looking for. So I went on a journey and really created those communities. So, it's really important. It helps you give yourself a sense of identity as well. So to me, that's what community means.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for having me. I think that's a pretty deep question, because I feel like we use the word community a lot, and especially in a lot of social justice spaces, we say, like, I'm in community with this person. And so I think community often for me kind of goes back to accountability and thinking about how we can create spaces where we can call each other in and have conversations that are critical for us to move forward, and really think about how we develop a solidarity framework, an anti-racism framework, an anti-capitalist framework, and really hold space for each other to grow and learn in a way that's coming in from compassion and from genuine care for another person. It's saying, like, I really want to grow and learn with you, and I'm not saying this because I want to call you out, but I'm calling you in this conversation. And I also think community means, having a lot of joy, having people that you can count on to have your back. This is a term, we keep us safe. And I think especially right now in the context of police and prison abolition, thinking about what does that look like when communities keep each other safe and look out for each other. And just thinking, like, each of us has our own different role to play in our community, right? Maybe I'm the person that does art for folks, or maybe I'm the person that is cooking the food. I don't know. There's like so many different roles that people can take on. So I think of it in that way.
I think that's really fascinating, because like, I think for me, like, community is about belonging and having a shared experience. And I think that ties in with a lot of the work that you're doing, Shani. And then also, I've never looked at community as accountability. I've never kind of put those two together, but the way that you explained that, Haleema, is really, really interesting and quite unique for me anyway. So why do you think community is important then, Haleema?
Yeah, I mean, community is something that, honestly, I think, especially when you're part of a communities of color, or you identify as a person of color, or have other marginalized identities or disenfranchised identities, it's really important for us to have communities, because they keep us safe, they keep us going in the sense of survival, but also how we are able to thrive and hold space for each other. I also think of the term community care, and really thinking about how do we create spaces for our collective care and support, so that it's not just you being like, I have to practice self-care, which is important, but we don't always have the means to do that, right? If you're a single mom who has all these things around, like, how are you supposed to do self-care? And so it's like, how do people in your community show up for you, and how do you show up for them, so that you can kind of take care of each other and look out for each other? And I think over here, like in the United States, where we see a lot of people who, especially if you identify, within the non-dominant identity, you need community to be able to make it. So I think communities are so vital for us to be able to do that. And then also, as Shani was saying, like, it gives you a sense of belonging. You feel cared for, that people have your back, people that you might be able to relate to or just have conversations with. So I think it's really important. And also right now in the middle of this COVID pandemic, we're all in this situation where we can't, physically really engage with our community. But I think having those relationships and being able to connect with folks online is still important.
Yeah, and I think something all of us have in common is that we've all created our own communities. Like even Sheetal, with you, with SASS, you guys have created a space. Why do you think it was important for you to create that space, and what really inspired you, Sheetal? And then I guess that's something we can all kind of discuss.
I mean, that's a good question. I think kind of touching upon what Shani was saying earlier, which is about, there was something missing in that kind of need to feel like you belong somewhere and to like you feel safe somewhere. I think safety, for me, is a big word when I think of community, and being in a space where it's like I can be me. I don't have to adjust myself or like pretend, or I can, this is my whole identity, and this is where I feel safe like showcasing that. So like for like me and Sharon, who like co-founded SASS, like it was about we're talking about these issues that affect like South Asian women like underhand. Like we both were writing blogs, and I remember writing my own blog and being like, if I share this, is our community what are they gonna think of me? Because we don't talk about these issues openly. And then so we kind of got together and we're like, why not try and create a space where we can do that, where it's safe and we feel like we can connect with other people over these issues, because they are mutual in a lot of ways, and kind of see what happens. So yeah, it was that kind of, I guess for me personally, more like desire to be like, I have all these thoughts and parts of my identity that I don't feel like I can express safely right now. If it doesn't exist, maybe we'll just have to go and make it and create it. So yeah, that was kind of where that came from.
How about you, Shani?
Yeah, I really echo that, because one of the reasons why I created Asian Women Festival, because I was looking for a similar sort of event or community to connect with and couldn't really find it. And I sort of felt that, well, if I'm looking for it, then there must be other people that feel the same way. And if I have these thoughts and want to talk to someone that's like-minded, that can understand my experience as a South Asian woman, there has to be others out there. And I also think just that whole experience of the conflict we feel of being South Asian, being Britain, and then add, a religion onto that as another layer, for example. No one ever talks about that conflict, You're never British enough, you're never Asian enough, Indian enough, whatever you want to call that. And we need to start talking about it, because so much of our life is dictated by it. Our childhood, the decisions we make as adults. So I really wanted to really create a space to talk about that, taboo topics, because I want to challenge perceptions and change attitudes ultimately. And if we don't have a space to talk about certain topics, we're never going to change the dial. So for me, it was more around that.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Haleema, I'm just coming back to something you touched on earlier, because I think really interesting how you and Shani had like slightly different perspectives on this idea of community, and sort of one being more slightly, and something I touched upon as well, which is like, oh, for me, I need to feel like find my space where I belong. And then you kind of talking about, actually it's about like mutual, not dependency, but the interaction is actually a two-way. It's not just about, this is, I need to find a space where I fit and my emotions and thoughts are valid, but it's actually a two-way street, and actually other people are depending on me as part of that community to support them to feel in a certain way, and that feeling of like accountability as well. Yeah, I guess in terms of that, like where does that come into the work that you do, in wanting to feel part of a space, but also feeling like the need to use that space to push almost your community to have certain dialogues, which kind of Shani was touching upon already.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a really large South Asian community in the United States, and even though I was around people who looked like me, who shared a similar identity as myself, I didn't feel a lot of connection for a long time, and a lot of it was because of my perspective and my views on addressing gender-based violence or addressing racial injustice, like different topics that just were not being talked about, at least not openly within my community. And so it's really frustrating not to see people who are South Asian speaking up about these issues, or even in the back, like being in conversations about these. And it took me a while to find a place where I could, connect with people on these topics and say, like, we have to address the different kinds of oppression that we're seeing in our community. And my initial like conversations and connections and community that I was able to connect with were not South Asian, and they're people who had completely different backgrounds than myself, but we kind of had the same like value agreement that like these are issues that we need to address and talk about, and that we were all kind of committed to. And so we're able to kind of hold space for each other in that way. I think now, through South Asians for Black Lives, through Malika, I've been able to connect more with people who are South Asian and share similar kind of commitments to addressing, you know, gender-based violence, to addressing anti-Blackness. But it was like after I was like, you know, when I was starting my early 20s, where I found these spaces, and it's been really powerful to be able to point to people who have a South Asian identity, who have also been doing this, because it almost felt like, you know, something I really wanted when I was younger, you know, to be around that, but not have that now, to see that. And then not only that, but to realize that there was a whole history of South Asians in my community that have been activists that I was never really taught about. So I've been also doing an exploration of, you know, the people that were here before me and the early organizing and all the incredible work that took place, to start identifying, okay, like where's like, which group of people that I'm actually coming from. Because I think within the United States as well, and I'm going a little bit off tangent, so stop me anytime, but within the context of the United States, you know, we have this framework of the model minority myth, and it frames South Asians, Asians broadly, as a group of that has, you know, been successful, that has made it by working hard, which is completely false, and it you know, makes us look like a monolith, which we're not. It just represents like, you know, we're all the same, and it erases so many disparities within our community. And it's something that a lot of South Asians, especially like in the part of the United States that I'm in, kind of fall in line with, so that they can have the temporary and like conditional, like little bit of power that white supremacy is going to give you. And in that vein, like, we just don't talk about the radical South Asians in our community. We don't talk about the history of South Asian activism and organizing. And then, you know, as a young person, you just think, oh, South Asians just don't do that kind of stuff. But actually, like, we do. It's in our ancestry. It's in our community. We just have to learn about it. So I think it's so important for us to also kind of look back, like, which communities are we coming from, and like who built the foundations for us to be here this way. And I think especially when we're not like in our motherlands, like there's a very specific history of how our community was built and allowed to even exist. Yeah, I'll stop there.
That was really, really fascinating, especially like the whole, like, because you bring that, the perspective of like the USA, which is something that, I mean, I don't think we have the same idea per se, but the fact that the South Asian community, we do not have homogenous experiences, you know, like Bangladeshi women suffer way more than Pakistani or Indian women do. And this is reflected in a lot of stats and a lot of research that has been recently done. So, I mean, yeah, we're always like pitted as like a homogenous community, but we're not. And we all have these completely different experiences, which I guess kind of leads to Sheetal's like the next question, which is, are we really like one big community, and does one South Asian community actually exist? So yeah, I don't know, what do you guys think? What do you think, Shani?
I think there's a lot of connectedness between all the South Asian communities. I think there's lots of similarities. We share very, you know, similar things within our cultures, you know, and then even if you wanted to talk about religion, there are some things that are comparable and some things that are different. So I want to say yes and no. So, you know, I'm Sikh, Punjabi, my experience is going to be very different to Haleema's. But we will probably have more that unites us than divides us, if that makes sense. So I think it depends on the context of you know, why we're grouping people together. So in some ways it can be useful, in some ways it can be harmful. You know, just like Haleema just spoke about the model minority myth as well, like that's way harmful. So yeah, I think it depends on the context, but yeah, there's way more that's similar about us than not.
And I thought it was quite interesting because Sheetal and I were having this conversation the other day, and it was like, we want to create these communities and we see ourselves somewhat as having shared experiences, but when you go to places like India or Pakistan, like they don't really see themselves as like a community. Like there are so many divides, like religion, caste, you know, color as well. So like they have all of these different kind of, whereas we kind of, I think as like children of the diaspora, or how we say it, it's like we kind of crave that sense of belonging, and we create these communities, and we kind of overlook the differences that a lot of people back in like, you know, India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, like they don't, like they kind of cling on to these differences almost. I mean, I think anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard because you look at the numbers. South Asians make up around 25% of the world population. I mean, you just pause and just think like a quarter of the world population summed up with one umbrella term. And I think sometimes too, you know, that is interchangeably used or categorized with Asian. And Asians make up around 60% of the world population. So again, those are really big numbers, and then you're getting lumped into this category. And yeah, to some degree, I agree with Shani, like, you know, there are going to be overlaps or similarities and things like that, but there is also so much diversity within our community. Like you can be Black in South Asian, you can be Indo-Caribbean, even within, you know, India, there's so many different communities and different subgroups, right? And they all have their own distinct cultures. You go to Hyderabad, it's going to be very different than Mumbai, right? And just kind of recognizing that. And then I think even within, when we looked a little bit deeper, you know, within the different stances that we're taking, right? We have people like Modi and Bauer, right? And that is, you know, one end. And then you have people that are very progressive. So there's a lot of diversity, and like any community, there's going to be diversity in that aspect. So I don't know. Sometimes I think we need to be specific when we're saying like South Asian, like who are we referring to when we're saying that? And I think we need to always be focused on disaggregating data, disaggregating any points that are coming out where people are broadly saying, well, all South Asians are successful or all South Asians are like this. Let's actually break that down and see which South Asians, right? And it typically tends to be folks that are upper caste, folks that are Indian, Pakistani, light skin, right? There's a lot of layers of oppression within our own South Asian diaspora that we really, really need to unpack. And if we continue to kind of keep it as one umbrella term and not look at the specifics, we're going to continue to uphold or be apathetic towards colorism and casteism and other forms of oppression that are really serious within our community. I think even if you look at South Asia, or if you even look at the United States or the different parts where like our diaspora have settled, like even within those communities, there are so many divides and so many issues that we need to be dismantling. And I think sometimes too, to some degree, like when you aren't in South Asia directly, like when you have, you know, you're in the United States or in the UK and you are not, you know, directly connected, you kind of have like these additional, I don't know, there's additional things that you shed parts of your identity almost when it comes to being South Asian. And then it's easier for you to kind of speak to some of the other things that are happening and not necessarily realizing that, oh, I also, like, you don't necessarily have a strong analysis on caste, but you are better able to speak about racism or xenophobia or nationalism. And so it gets complicated too in that sense, where you kind of have a hyphenated identity almost, and you're a little bit of like American, but then you're also South Asian. And then you're growing up within the context of, you know, this other country. It complicates things. And then you're in this, you know, you have to figure out a lot of stuff on your own sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it kind of touched upon like how, you know, we're all part of the diaspora, and like that potentially that need for community is almost needed more, because and you know, maybe it would be different when we were back in our homelands, and we would have different experiences, who knows. But I wonder if also to an extent, because we aren't in our countries of heritage, like whether a lot of that kind of sense of community has been put on us. And if we're talking about data, for example, like we're not usually the ones carrying out the research, are we? And so it's like, oh, you know, Asians. And also interesting that you pointed out, Haleema, earlier, in terms of like how, you know, whether it's South Asian or Asian. And I know in our like little convo last week, we were talking about how in the UK, actually South Asian is still not a very commonly used term. It is Asian, and that means South Asians, and generally kind of excludes like East Asians or Southeast Asians, or, you know, the wider group that actually addresses. And thinking about actually is community almost like put upon us, because it's like we've put you in this group now as like you know, you're minorities, but Asians, it's just easier for us to like stick you in a category. And
I think it's really important to remember that yes, whether we like it or not, we are going to be put in a community, but we can also create our own as well. And that doesn't mean that it has to be fellow South Asians. It can just be any other thing that, you know, you might have in likeness with somebody else or another group of people. So I think, yes, like there's so many similarities, but there's so much diversity within that as well. So I think that's something key to remember.
Yeah, that's also really important. I think it like really ties in with the work that you do, not only with Asian Women Festival, but also with like the disabled community and all of the like incredible work that you've done. It's like, I'm part of the South Asian community, but I'm also part of other communities too. And it doesn't have to be just based on race or just based on religion. It can be other aspects of, you know, our identity, or where we feel we belong, or where we feel we can change things.
Yeah, or flipping that on its head, because, you know, where we feel that we don't belong in some spaces, because I found that I was at a point where I couldn't take my whole identity somewhere. I always had to dissect it. I could never always be an Asian woman who experienced disability. You know, I had to be one of those three things. So for me, I think we really need to progress past the word diversity. We need to be using the word intersectionality as the standard. I think diversity is, you know, a starting point. That's what actually segregates identities to then further talk about inclusion, for example. But in order to be truly inclusive, you know, we're all intersectional to some degree, and that the overlapping of all of those identities create really unique experiences, but also challenges. So because I never really felt a sense of belonging, I really craved these communities. And it wasn't until I first hosted the Asian Women Festival, I had to create an event where I could feel that I could take my whole self. Now, on one hand, that's great, and on one other hand, it's a bit sad as well. Like, I shouldn't have had to do that. It should already have existed. So yeah, I think that's really important to consider as well.
What has your experience with Asian Women Festival taught you about the South Asian community? I'm using this more in like inverted commas now, and I've seen some of the chat which is talking about like, does that even exist? Is it just a term we've put on ourselves? And obviously we're here today to like try and unpick that a bit. But you know, you've created this like huge like national like initiative, and that has so much, you know, interaction and attention. I came to the first one last year, you know, and yeah, so it's gained so much traction. So there's obviously a need for it. Yeah. What has your experience been in doing that, and what has it taught you about this idea of a South Asian community, and does it exist? And you know, what kind of learnings and challenges have you seen in that process?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that you know, the second and third generation, we have so much choice and freedom that obviously our parent generation didn't. And I know that sounds really obvious as I'm saying that out loud, but what that also does is make some decisions a little bit more difficult, especially in my experience I've felt. So let's say, like, I don't know, I've wanted to do something and it's not very favourable in my parents' eyes. You know, I might still go and do that, but then I also might feel a huge sense of guilt. So one thing I've really learned is that the more choice we have doesn't necessarily make it a more easier life to live. You can actually feel even more conflicted. And you know, when I was creating the idea of the festival, the concept, I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought maybe 200 people turn up. We actually had over 1,000 people there on the day. People travelled from abroad. We're now an international community. I didn't know that was going to happen. I went into this thinking, you know what, I'll do the first one and I'll see how it goes. Because up until this point, I had only asked the people in my circle whether this was a good idea, whether this, you know, do you think other people want this? And of course, they're saying yes, because also they're my friends. So yeah, there's so much that I've learned. I think I'd need another 5 hours just to talk about that separately. But I think Yeah, I think obviously the challenges are different for each generation, but it's not necessarily easier. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned, and I think that's actually what's brought everybody together because they want to talk about it, and you know, as each new generation comes along, those challenges get more complex. So you know, where was the space to talk about that? But then also we're still being pulled by the taboo topics that we can't talk about, or the things that cause shame, within the community. So yeah, a whole host of things.
Yeah, I think something you touched upon there was the amount of access and to an extent like privilege our generation has, which is in being able to start Asian Women Festival and to found SASS and to have these spaces, because it's not like this work hasn't been done before.
Exactly.
But it just hasn't been able to be done in this way. I mean, and actually, to be fair, I might even be wrong on that, but I think through doing SASS, and even though we generally attract to like I'd say 18 to 30 age groups, so around the same generation, we have met people like older women who've been like, what do you mean? We've been having these conversations for years. We just didn't have either the platform or obviously social media didn't exist, or you couldn't do webinars, and things like that. So I think the generational one is quite interesting. And Haleema, you touched upon it earlier in terms of like, what can we learn from what's already been done? And yeah, in your work and in your experience, have you seen anything that either previous generations have done in terms of particularly amongst like the South Asian community and building that sense of solidarity or that kind of connection that we perhaps can learn from in us being younger and like creating these initiatives? But again, there are learnings that we still have to incorporate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky to be able to know like a lot of the folks that started organizations like ASATA, which stands for Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, or SALT, and those are based in the U.S., but they've been one of the first like organizations like actually established the work of South Asian organizing more officially, I would say, over the last 10 to 20 years. So it's been cool to be able to like tap on those people to ask for advice and support, and to be able to kind of learn from what they've already done in terms of what solidarity looks like, what allyship looks like, and then even organizing within the South Asian community around certain issues that are happening. We also have South Asian Radical History Walking Tour in California, where I'm based out of, and so you kind of get to go and see and learn about the different people in the city that were South Asian activists that were doing a lot of incredible work. So there is a lot of history for us to kind of look to, and to kind of understand the ways that we can move forward, and also to learn from those folks like how they navigated, when they made mistakes. So, like, we all make mistakes in the work that we do, and yeah, how do you like move forward with accountability? How do you kind of address those aspects? And then yeah, so it's been like great to have people to tap onto. I think that's such a privilege when you can say like, oh, I know this auntie who can like help me out, and I can call her and she will like walk me through this. And there's like a handful of aunties and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad to like know that you're here and that you've been doing this really radical work for a while, and you're willing and ready to say, I'm going to share with you as someone who is like newer to this space. So I think there's a lot for us to learn, and we should always kind of be looking to see what the folks before us have done. And there's also a lot of history, I will add, that intentionally is not shared about South Asians. So there's a PBS documentary that came out in Asian Heritage Month, and that kind of covered, broadly for all Asians, I guess, covered the history of Asians in the United States. And that's really interesting because there was they covered a lot around the activism, and then they also covered a lot around what we need to kind of be accountable for, because there's a lot of harm that our community was complicit and is complicit in, right? Sometimes we're the ones that are perpetuating oppression against other communities of color, or we're being apathetic to, and we see that a lot too. So I think it's a little bit of both too. Like, we have to also reconcile with the people before us, like what they have done, and also the people in our current like space right now, what they are continuing to uphold, right? So we have to reconcile with, I think, both those things.
Yeah, I mean, on that, firstly, it's nice to hear like a positive rep of aunties. I saw a couple of comments saying that, like, I think aunties get a really bad rep. And also to address that, you know, appreciate that there is that work still being done by those older than us. Like, it's not just like way back when, it's still going on. And obviously this conversation is very much centered on like young millennials and talking about this, but you know, very much acknowledging that existed. But I think really interesting that in California, and specifically, that history is there, and that there is that much to learn from. And I guess in a way, I wonder if Amina and Shani do comment on this in terms of where the UK is at in terms of acknowledging the history of like the South Asian community in this country. And I don't know, for example, from my perspective, from like the SASS perspective, there's so many younger women talking about this now, and creating, and that's great. You know, it's amazing to see. But, you know, for me, I feel like that connection with the generations before us and what they're doing isn't there yet. I haven't seen that yet. I don't know what you guys think on that.
I mean, even if we think about like the work that South All Black Sisters did like such a long time ago, but so many, I mean, I feel anyway, and please in the chat if you disagree, please say so. Like, I feel like a lot of the younger gen, we don't know about the work that they did, and we don't know about these, you know, people who came before us. And I was just reading the chat quickly, and someone said, like, obviously we stand on the shoulders of giants, and I think we should really acknowledge that. I mean, I don't know if you can say it was harder in those times to kind of create a community. Like, now it's quite easy with social media to connect with people and create these spaces. But I really like deeply respect all the older gen who have done so much work, and whether that's like community in fighting against racism, or whether that's community in fighting against Islamophobia and establishing some of the earliest mosques here in the UK, like, you know, those sort of communities. I think like it is really important for us to connect with the older gen. But I think aunties and stuff, like you said, Sheila, they get such a bad rep, and we often think that, no, we're young and we know everything, and like we're the ones who are like the frontline activists. But actually, coming back to your point, Haleema, like, I hope that we can kind of have that sort of relationship with the older generation, and really I hope that the younger gen, like myself included, can learn more and educate ourselves more about those people who came before us, and I think who carved the path for a lot of like activism and social justice that we see today.
Yeah, and I think like folks from those generations who have done that work and who still are doing that work, they're excited to see, you know, the next wave of people kind of stepping up and starting to help carry that work forward. So I think it's kind of like a two-way thing where like we're super excited that we can see an auntie that we can relate to, and the aunties are like, I'm so excited to see like this younger person stepping up too. So I definitely think it's a two-way. And for folks who are tuning in, like, I would encourage you to reach out to like elders in your community and have those conversations with them. It can be really nice to hear from their own perspectives, like what it was like for them, and also recognizing that sometimes, you know, our elders were not always in an easy position. You know, we have aunties that experience gender-based violence and domestic violence, and those aren't easy things. So like, as much as, you know, we say bad things about aunties sometimes, or aunties are this and aunties are that, like aunties go through a lot too, and uncles as well. So I think we have to kind of hold space for that too, and recognize like sometimes they might not be as radical as like we want them to be, but like they have their own challenges, and it's because of them that we can be, you know, where we're at. It's because of them that we have the space and time to like, let me break down what casteism is, or like this different form of oppression, and like sit with that and reflect on that and learn about that, and all of those things. So I definitely think it's a two-way street, and I would encourage folks to reach out, because it's important for us to know our history and know where we're coming from.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really important, and I hope that some way like we can have that intergenerational conversation at some point, because now I feel, anyway, in my experience, there is quite a big gap between the two.
Yeah, I think it's about you know, actively this generation reaching out as well. Like we don't do enough of that. What I have noticed though, through the events that we've done at Asian Women Festival, we've always had a wide range, especially women attend. So we generally have a predominantly, I would say, younger audience, especially because I guess we're quite active on Instagram. But all of our platforms, we have different audiences. And even our blogs, they're written by all different ages of women. We had Bibi on walking around at the Asian Women Festival. We also planned to bring your Bibi corner as well. So we had a Bibi corner planned for this
cool.
year.
That's so amazing. I would be part of that corner because I am
too. That's where I was going to be. So, at Asian Women Festival, we really understand the importance of understanding those experiences because, like Haleema said, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them and everything that they stood up for in whichever way that they could. And, I think it's so much easier for us to do the work that we're doing now. I would never have been able to have shared Asian Women Festival as widely as I have without social media. So I think we should do it much more actively as this generation and really look for those opportunities because there's so much to learn from our older examples.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. Sorry, Sheetal, what were you going to say?
That's all right. I was just going to come in there and think in terms of we've kind of explored like internally, like looking more inwards at our community, and again, that's a big umbrella term that we're exploring today, and thinking about our like internal, I guess, divisions and understandings and how we grow in that sort of solidarity internally. What are your thoughts on how the South Asian community kind of and how it kind of sits in relation to others? And I guess bringing that up because I've been quite, what's the word? Interested, frustrated, however you want to call it, to an extent in the ways that I've seen South Asians respond to like Black Lives Matter, which kind of obviously re-emerged a few months ago in terms of international prominence. And I've wrote something really angry about it a few weeks ago in terms of like why I felt like South Asians weren't either speaking up enough or not showing solidarity in the correct way. I mean, firstly, is that a responsibility of ours? And secondly, how can we do better? And not just in relation to kind of the black communities, but on a wider scale, like how do we do better at that?
Yeah.
Big question.
Yeah, no, it is a big question, but I also think some things are pretty simple when it comes to allyship and solidarity and kind of breaking. I think the first thing is like we need to break down some of the biases and apathy that we see within our community, because I think there's a lot of apathy. Like it's almost systematic. Like almost every person's like, oh, it's not our problem, put your head down, keep walking, don't cause any, like, don't ruffle anything. Like we want to continue kind of in this like middle ground that we're at. And I also think because a lot of mainstream conversations about race really kind of stay in this black and white thing, acting as if like those are the only two races that are like involved or in this situation, when in reality you have so many other communities that also have their own role to play, but we're not necessarily called out. Like you'll see headlines that say a white person did this, or dear white people, you need to do this, but there isn't necessarily like a specific call to action for South Asians. It's part of why I started volunteering with South Asians for Black Lives. So recognize that we need a specific call in to our community to say, hey, you South Asian, yes, you, I'm calling you in because we need to talk about this. So I think the first thing is breaking down that sense of apathy and also addressing the biases that we see. And there's a really great website, I'll link it in the chat, that a group of Gen Zs created here in the Bay Area. And it was kind of like a toolkit for how to talk to your community and your parents. And they literally did a Zoom call with like aunties and uncles and kids, like everyone. It was like very intergenerational. I thought it was very brave of them to get everyone on Zoom to say like, let's have a conversation about what's currently going on and how we can get involved. So I think that's the first thing, is like we need to break that down. And then the second thing is we need to think about allyship and solidarity from a sustainability model. So I think a lot of times we see the conversation trending, and that's when we feel the urge to speak on it or do something. And then once we do that thing, we feel like, okay, we did something and now it's over. But in reality, and I will just say within the context of the United States, we're dealing with 400 plus years of oppression. We're dealing with slavery that has evolved and continues to live today. We're dealing with police violence. There's so many situations and forms of oppression that we're facing. So to say that, oh, one post or one conversation with a friend or reading one book is is enough, it's not true. It's definitely not enough. And all of us need to say, I'm going to make a lifelong commitment to doing something every day. Maybe it's reading an article, maybe it's doing a reflection, maybe it's, you know, integrating this work into your career, but it has to be something every day. It has to be a daily act, because honestly, like, we have to look at how we can change systems. And so, yes, like the work to address the bias and apathy, that's like a good first step, but it's not the end destination, if that makes sense, right? We need to organize, we need to change policies. There's a lot of things that need to happen. So I want people to think about this from a long-term perspective, and to, like, you know, maybe sit down and journal and think about, what is my commitment? You know, what am I good at? What am I able to do? How can I make this sustainable and long-term? And that also maybe, like, you know, including something around self-care, because solidarity and allyship means you have to be able to show up for their community, and you can't show up if you are not okay. So I think you have to kind of walk through those things. I also wanted to share a concept called the model minority mutiny, and it's a term that Soya Jung kind of coined and created, and it's a call to action for us as South Asians, as Asians broadly, to reject the model minority myth, and for us to kind of come together around how we can actively denounce that. So whenever it is put on us, to actually pause and say, that's not true, right? Let's break this down. I also think of, you know, our proximity to whiteness. It's really important for us to examine. And that means letting go of respectability politics. I think that's something that we see a lot too. And that's another tool of white supremacy that has been used. And I also want to recognize that, you know, sometimes it's been respectability politics, you know, the way that we behave to kind of assimilate more towards whiteness. Sometimes it is for our own survival and code switching and things like that. But there are also moments where we have a privilege, a level of privilege, that we can pause and say, do I actually need to play into this? Or is this a moment for me to disrupt? Because we should be taking on that role. I also think we need to do a lot of experimentation for new models, because we are trying to push towards, right, like prison abolition, police abolition, anti-capitalism, and those are things that we may not have experienced before, right? We maybe have never experienced what it's like to live in a community without policing or without capitalism, because those systems kind of are integrated into our lives in many ways. So if we're trying to create something new, or that's what we're organizing towards, we have to also create space for play and experimentation, and say, I'm going to try like a barter model, or I'm going to try like a worker-owned co-op model, right? And we have to be able to have the room to say, okay, I might not work, but I need to try something different, right? Maybe I'm going to you know, commit to getting to know all my neighbors and getting their numbers and hanging out with them. And that way, if something happens, I'm not going to call the police, I'm going to call my neighbor, or they can call me, and something like that. So I think it's important for us to also think about that. And then lastly, I think just recognizing that all of us have a lot of unlearning and like relearning to do. So being open to when someone calls us in, not getting defensive about it, and saying, okay, I'm going to pause here and take what you're saying as a gift, and then go back and do my own learning so that I can learn and grow from this. It's really important for us to do that, and for that to be a daily effort. So even with South Asians for Black Lives, like all of us as volunteers have like weekly readings and reflections. So as we are, you know, taking up like leadership and doing some of that work, we're also continuing to educate ourselves, because we're on the tip of the iceberg. We have so much to learn. And I don't think there's ever going to be a destination where you are like the expert or you know it all. And especially when you're living in a society, in a culture that is entrenched with white supremacy, it's in the air that you breathe. So even if your mind and your body and everything is like in agreement that, yes, I'm against this, the moment you step outside, like you're still breathing in white supremacy in a sense. It's in the culture, and it's in every single place, like it's in our homes, it's in the workplace, it's in our schools, it's in what we're seeing in the media. So even though we might, you know, have done that work, we have to continue doing it, and always pause and like evaluate and unlearn. I'll stop there.
No, that was really fascinating. And I think it comes down to accountability, being active, proactive, and just kind of continuing to learn, but also putting that learning into action. Like I know, you know, a couple of months ago with the re-emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of people are like, read this. And obviously we have to read and educate ourselves, but it's about action as well. Like there's no point sitting at home with all of these books and not actually putting that into action and serving your community, holding yourself and other members of your community accountable as well. So I think that was That was a really, those 3-4 tips that you gave, I hope someone was making notes on that in one of the attendees, because those were some really solid practical tips for everyone that we can learn from. And from that, Shani, how do you think that we can better serve the communities that you are a part of?
I think definitely allyship, and Haleema's just spoken about that so eloquently. That was definitely a mic drop moment. But definitely allyship. I think there's so much unlearning to do, which we've already spoken about today. Because I think a lot of what we have been taught is what our parents were told or learned, or also taught from parents who may have been immigrants and have based their thoughts on certain experiences that they had as well, which are going to be very different to ours as second or third generation, people in our countries. So it's definitely about learning. So, if you don't have to know a disabled person to need to understand the experience of disability. There's so many books we can read, films we can watch. A tip, a recommendation I want to give actually is Modern Love on Amazon Prime, episode 3, absolutely brilliant. I was just watching it, I didn't know it was gonna, reference disability, and it was so striking, and it was around mental health. And even I learnt loads. So there's so many ways in which, we can tap into and learn from others, I think. And then for women, it's around, for me, and around women's rights, it's around equality, and it's around making sure women have that equal access to opportunity, equal access to the things that they want to do. They're not bound by certain things to do with their culture, or you have to do this by this age and you have to do this career. I think generally for me, it all comes back down to humanity. Like, treat people how you want to be treated. It doesn't matter, how you look, how you move your body. We're all the same at the end of the day, and be kind to one another.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think what one interesting thing that has come out of this conversation, which I guess you kind of think when you hear it back that it's quite obvious, but I think one thing for me to kind of clearly take away is that being a member of a community, again, using that as a huge umbrella term, and everyone interprets that differently, is about the self, but it's also about everyone else around you, and that kind of dual connection. So it's a connection with like my own identity and where I want to feel safe and connected and accepted, but also that responsibility almost, and Haleema used the word accountability a lot of times, like accountability to others. I think I'm seeing that more in like in kind of modern activism as well. There's a lot of like, I feel like there's been almost a split between like the way that activism is kind of working at the moment, in like people are going into activism saying like, I want to be an activist because I want to help, and it's like, but you're missing the connection, which is actually is about your connections with other people and supporting other people. And I feel like that's such a crucial part of it. It's about being aware of yourself, but being aware of everyone around you and how the responsibility you have to others.
I think it's about like raising others, isn't it? It's raising others up, empowering others, supporting fellow women. I don't know about you ladies, but sometimes I feel like Asian women are their own worst enemies. There's so many examples that I can give you of people not supporting one another, or people feeling like they're in some sort of competition when there's space for everybody to do whatever they want to do. We're not in competition. In actual fact, we all go through hardship, being of an ethnic minority, living in a different country. We've got so many shared experiences. We should be helping each other. We should be creating opportunities, opening doors for one another. So that's definitely something that we're doing and have done always at Asian Women Festival. And then I just wanted to pick up on the point around activism, because activism doesn't always have to be this big protest or this huge act, or you don't have to do some like big heroic thing. Activism is actually having a difficult conversation with someone. Activism can actually mean standing up for somebody when you hear something being said that where the language isn't right. That is also activism. So it can be done in so many different ways, and I think it's like a drumbeat. It has to keep going. So when we're trying to change culture or change perceptions or challenge perceptions even, we have to keep talking about it. So, you know, I've had some very difficult conversations within my own family and extended family about Black Lives Matter and racism, and it's been really difficult. And I've had to think, wow, like some people's opinions have really shocked me, and it's also exhausting to keep like educating people, but it has to be done. And if you're somebody like me, like I won't stop until it's done. So yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, reassure people that we all have the tools to do it. It could be just a conversation, you know. It could be standing up for somebody, but what's most important is that we do it,
and that we're like committed and persistent with it as well, because I think that's kind of coming back to Shani and Haleema, what you said. It's like it's about keeping it going. It's that drumbeat that keeps going and it doesn't stop. And I think a lot of people now, it's like, it's very trendy to be an activist now, but when people realize the work it takes to be a real, and I don't mean like doing big heroic acts, but even just to be silently committed to something, you know, like racism, like fighting against racism or Islamophobia or classism, etc. It is exhausting, but that's where your passion and your love and genuineness being genuine comes into it. Because if you are genuine or passionate about something, it doesn't always feel like work all the time.
yeah
It feels
I actually
good to yourself, right?
Yeah, there's so many roles. I did plug in the chat. There's a really great tool that you can use that was created by Deepa Iyer, and it's called My Role in a Social Change Ecosystem. And she kind of maps out the different roles that kind of are needed within a system. And then she also offers guiding questions. You can find out like, what are you good at? You know, what does your community ask you to do? Where can you push your privilege and things like that? So I would encourage folks to look into that if you're, you know, feeling like I don't know what my role is. And also encourage you not to be stopped by the fear of like perfection. I definitely had moments where I was like, oh, I don't know enough to do this, or I don't think I'm ready and I still need to learn before I can do something about the issue. And while it's true, you know, we do need to educate ourselves to some degree and have intentionality. The flip side is also like, we're never going to know everything. And so we should be able to still move forward in some capacity without feeling like I have to be perfect at what I do, and just be ready, like, to know that like, you're going to make mistakes. I've made so many mistakes, you know, and just be ready and open to moving forward. If you do make mistakes, it's going to happen, right? So I think just like, don't let that idea of like, oh, I have to be perfect at this, or I have to know everything before I can do something, like stop you.
Yeah, otherwise no one would do anything, would they? But that was really good advice, because I think that can actually be a barrier to which puts fear in people to not even say anything, which can actually be even worse. So yeah, really good point.
Yeah, and I think actually our last question, it's already almost 7:30, I can't believe how time's gone, but our last question was actually going to be, could you summarize for kind of our audience in one sentence how one can be a better part of the community? But I think you kind of just rounded that off nicely there anyway, in terms of your discussion, and yeah, just remembering you're not alone, but remembering to keep going, and also remembering that, you know, it is a journey and it takes persistence, and it does mean looking after yourself. I think for me that's the biggest takeaway, is that the self and the connection with the wider community is like looking after yourself, but also you're there to support others, and remembering both sides of that. And that's what I've kind of taken away from this. I don't know if you had any takeaways that you wanted to pick up on.
Definitely, like I've never really put together accountability and community, but after this conversation with you, Shani and Haleema, I've realized how actually it's a crucial part of being part of a community. And that doesn't mean like canceling people if they get something wrong. It's about, and I love this change of phrase that a lot of people are saying now, instead of calling out, it's calling in. And I think that that's really important. I think in addition to that, I would say, like, and this comes back also to Shani, what you said about, you know, parts where you belong and you don't belong, is find what you are passionate about and make that your community. Because for some people, being South Asian is not a passion of theirs. They don't particularly care about it, whatever. You don't have to be part of that community, you know. And in fact, if it's not genuine, I would say it can be dangerous if you're part of a community and you don't genuinely have love, passion, or you don't generally have a care or concern for that community, right? So it's about what feels genuine to you and what community do you feel a part of. If it's not there, create it. And if it is there, feel accountable for whatever is going on within that space. I don't know. I think that's what I would kind of say that I've taken away from this. I don't know, Shani, what would kind of be like one sentence on how somebody can be a better part of the community they're in?
I think it's also about really recognizing the privilege that you have in certain circumstances and using that to create opportunities for others and hold space for others as well. So sorry, I'm not supposed to give a one sentence answer, but just to give an example, I do a lot of talks around disability. You know, I can only really be an expert on the condition that I experience. However, I hold space for others because they, for whatever reason, don't have the voice to do that, and I'm in that space and I have an opportunity and I have a message to say. Therefore, I think, you know, it's still want to use that, but recognizing that I'm holding space for others in order to make that change and be an ally for them. Yeah, a couple of sentences there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for adding, Shani. I would say like a way that we can all be a better part of our own communities is by being open and coming from a place of, you know, genuine care and curiosity and being ready to commit to doing the work, because sometimes it is hard work. But when you come in with a genuine care and curiosity and you're ready for that, then it definitely helps.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you to everyone who joined. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. I know I would like love to go on and go like way deep, but unfortunately, it's the end. It's 7:30 now. But thank you, Haleema and Shani, for joining us today. And for those of you attending, next week we have another amazing event on resilience. That's the topic we're going to be exploring next Wednesday, same time. So yeah, we hope you benefited from today. We hope you took away something and that you enjoyed yourselves, and hopefully we will see you guys next week on Wednesday. Bye.
And make sure you follow these guys on social media because they're both awesome. So make sure you do that.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you so much, guys.